Hello and welcome to Lost Love Chronicles. James Jonathan Pruitt, better known to all as Jimmy Jack, had died at the tender age of 40, leaving behind his wife and 3 daughters. The lawyer had called them together to read through Jimmy Jack's last instructions relating to his will and testament. The lawyer's assistant had just served coffee to the 4 women and now stood by with boxes of Kleenex. The attorney believed that those boxes would be needed. Pulling some papers out of a file, the lawyer, Prentice, held them up for the loved ones to see. "It's pure Jimmy Jack," he insisted on writing out his last instructions himself, longhand. "The formal legal last will document has been filed with the courts and a copy will be presented to you before you leave. However, he requested that I read this handwritten synopsis to the 4 of you, together. It includes personal messages absent in the formal, legal document." He cleared his throat, took a sip of water, and began. "If this is being read to my family, it means that I am gone. I've prepared this document and the accompanying will with my friend and attorney, Richard Prentice, to make known the arrangements that have been put in place for the care and well-being of my loving family when I am gone. But first, a little background, some of which my daughters might not be aware. When I fell in love with my darling and bewitching wife, Maureen simpers at this loving praise, I was just 20. My parents insisted that I should wait, but Maureen and I were in love. I was already receiving money from the Pruitt Family Trust and could easily support a family, and so saw no reason to delay our happiness. My parents finally agreed to sanction our wedding once we included them in on the secret of Maureen's pregnancy, which resulted in our lovely daughter, Lydia. My mother still insisted upon a prenuptial agreement to protect the Pruitt Family Trust. In this prenup, my wife agreed to forego any claims to any property that was being held in trust for me or my descendants. Of course, my wife wanted to protect our offspring and willingly signed the document. As I found was typical of her, she didn't read the document she was signing. It was a good marriage. I've been happy for the last 20 years. Lydia was followed within a year by Rebecca, and a year later Jocelyn joined the family. I was a doting father, and they were, and are my adorable girls. 3 were enough, though, for my wife. She complained our daughters were already robbing her of time she wanted to share with me. I thought it was cute. My girl was jealous of my girls. But I agreed. 3 was fine, although I would have liked a son, and offered to have a vasectomy. My loving wife instead opted for having her tubes tied. She insisted, against all the evidence I could provide, that I might be risking impotence with a vasectomy, and she couldn't have that happen to her lover. That settled the matter, and I was happy with our precious 3. Now, at 39, I've been laid low by acute leukemia. My doctor told me that mine was the oldest onset of this disease that he'd ever encountered, and that the prognosis wasn't good. My parents are gone, and I have no siblings to harvest bone marrow from. My AB blood type limits possible donors, and furthermore, there are rare leukocytes in my system that further reduce any possible donor pool. My loving daughters, who have always held my heart in their hands, wanted to be tested, although the chances of a match were slim. They didn't match, of course. Maureen had predicted that they wouldn't and had attempted to dissuade them from being tested, to save them unnecessary pain. Desperate to help in any way possible, my girls insisted and were tested. No matches there, as predicted. Being wealthy, I was able to bring in multiple experts to review the data, hoping against hope that one would find the miracle for which we prayed. As I am now dead, you already know that I didn't get that miracle. Instead, I got whatever the opposite of a miracle is. On reviewing the rejected matches, one doctor, with whom I have become friends, asked if there could have been some mistake in my daughter's testing. According to the DNA, they were only half-sisters. The same mother, but 3 different sires. The lawyer paused and took another sip of water as the girls gasped and turned shocked eyes onto their mother. "MOM, the 3 voiced as one. Way back then, you were cheating on Daddy?" Lydia continued. "No," insisted Maury. "They must have screwed up the samples." On cue, Prentice continued reading the document. While I insisted that it was impossible, the doctor suggested that the easiest way to confirm the test was to profile Maureen's DNA, and if the tests had been mixed up, she would not be the mother of the test subjects. I purloined one of her hairbrushes, and the resulting test confirmed her maternity of our daughters. He paused again for the expected gasps, and smiled as the Kleenexes began being distributed. I hid in the hospital for the next week, claiming that testing was necessary, testing which would affect my immune system, so I was kept in isolation. I was devastated that my loving wife had never been mine, even before our marriage. I had to accept the fact that during my entire marriage, I had been coupled. Her concern that a vasectomy might cause impotency suddenly became clear. The truth was my vasectomy wouldn't have protected her from future pregnancies. At this point, I engaged the services of a private investigator. It wouldn't take him long to establish that even as I was languishing in the hospital, Maureen was having trysts with several lovers. My wife had turned out to be a very busy girl. In spite of it all, I did realize that my girls, my loving daughters, were indeed my daughters. They obviously didn't know about their paternity, or they wouldn't have offered to be tested. They loved me, and I love them. I will always be their father, and will always want to support and protect them. Jocelyn's 18th birthday was in a few months, so divorce wouldn't result in child support. The girls' college careers were well funded with 529 accounts, so they would be fine. I was picking up the phone to call my friend Richard Prentice to begin the divorce proceedings when the absurdity of it hit me. I was dying, would probably be dead before a divorce could be finalized. If I lived, divorce would just result in my funding my wife's future sex life. No, divorce wasn't the answer. I wanted the woman to suffer, not to profit from our marriage. The PI had continued researching my wife's history, subtly interviewing her friends and acquaintances, while reviewing her financial histories, including her credit card bills. It was in the bills that he struck gold. My wife frequented a restaurant 20 miles away, an unremarkable restaurant with nothing to recommend it other than the motel it was located in. The restaurant's waitstaff, as well as a motel desk clerk, were very informative about Maureen's activities and, more importantly, the identity of her many partners. The motel clerk had believed that Maureen was an escort of some type. Reviewing motel security tapes allowed the PI to acquire license plates on the cars driven by the lovers. Some of those lovers liked to brag over drinks, and it was in one of those discussions that my real heartbreak was realized. It happened that Maureen only utilized the motel when I was likely to be home. Other times, the lovers frolicked in my own home, usually in one of the guest rooms, and they had met my daughters, my loving daughters. In fact, the PI reported that one man, a George Ramos, had a hilarious story about a day I came home unexpectedly and in a Keystone Cop type of hectic activity, he had to climb out a window while my wife threw his clothes out onto the lawn. He was able to get away, and my wife had cleaned up the room while my daughters delayed me downstairs. While my loving daughters, complicit in their mother's infidelity, delayed me downstairs. Jocelyn sobbed as she said, "Daddy knew. He knew we were covering for Mom." There was a flurry of Kleenexes being pulled from the boxes. Prentice continued on. So that's the background and complete history of my 20-year marriage. There's nothing left to say other than to detail the arrangements I have made, except to say that I forgive my daughters. I'm sure that they kept me in the dark about their mother's activities because of the love they have for her and the desire to keep our family intact. Therefore, working with Prentice and various financial advisors, I have established a trust for my daughters, a trust that is well funded enough to ensure their continued lifestyle and that of their children. They are also the current beneficiaries of the Pruitt Family Trust, of which I am now sole trustee. My children will be well cared for during their lives, regardless of what might happen between their mother and me. However, there are conditions on the new trust, conditions which have also been added to the Pruitt Family Trust. If these conditions are violated or not met by any of the beneficiaries, to include my daughters and all their descendants, that beneficiary and her descendants will be disenfranchised from both trusts in perpetuity. The condition to be met are: 1. Any contact with the woman currently known as Maureen Pruitt, my widow, will be considered a violation of the trusts. Contact includes in person or through a third party or by correspondence, whether physical, telephonic, or digital. The definition of contact will include any messages, gifts, monetary funding, or support of any kind, even if done through third parties. 2. It will count as contact if my widow approaches or contacts any beneficiary. It will be considered contact and a violation of the trusts. Therefore, it is in the beneficiary's interest to keep as much distance as possible between themselves and my widow. 3. If any possessions or monetary funds are willed to, deeded to, or in any other manner passed on to my widow, then that beneficiary and all her descendants will be disenfranchised. 4. A reward of $250,000 will be paid to any person who reports a violation which results in a beneficiary being faulted. In a test of a mother's love, Maureen is eligible for this reward should she report any violation by her offspring or should she manage to establish contact with said offspring. How strong is a mother's love? Is it stronger than a wife's love? Is it stronger than my widow's love of $250,000? 5. Should all beneficiaries become disenfranchised, the funds will then be immediately dispersed to the tertiary beneficiaries, i.e., the charities detailed in the trust documents. 6. In the trust documents, the term Maureen is specified to include not only my widow, but any disenfranchised former beneficiaries. That means contact with former beneficiaries will also violate the terms of the trust. Richard Prentice has detailed all the conditions in the legal will in the trust documentation. This firm has been administering the Pruitt Family Trust and will also now administer the second trust, officially to be known as the Jimmy Jack Vengeance Trust. All questions concerning that trust should be directed at him. Prentice again sipped his water while considering the women, who had the appearance of deer caught in a car's headlights. Jimmy Jack had asked me to point out that you girls can also qualify for the reward, and that additionally, the trust dividends would be higher when split between less beneficiaries, should anyone be disqualified. He smiled and returned to the document. To establish the Vengeance Trust, I have moved almost all my assets into the trust, with the approval and assistance of my loving wife. The lawyer paused as Maureen shrieked and insisted that she had never done that. It's a lie. She was sure that she had never helped move any assets. Richard Prentice picked up a remote control off his desk and hit play. Instantly, the widescreen TV on his wall came on with the image of Maureen and the firm's notary sitting with a pile of documents. The notary was explaining that the forms required her signature as well as Jimmy Jack's. She then asked if Maureen had had an opportunity to read the documents. Impatiently, Maureen insisted she had and began to sign form after form. The notary again asked if she had read them and was told, "Of course I have. Do you think I'm stupid?" The notary could be seen rolling her eyes at the camera as she took each signed document and held it up towards the camera. There would be no doubt what those documents were. She then asked, "There's a lot of legal documents here, Mrs. Pruitt. Are you sure you wouldn't like to go over these with your lawyer?" It was Maureen's turn to roll her eyes and admonish the notary, "I'm perfectly capable of understanding what I'm signing." She soon finished signing all the documents in the pile. Prentice turned off the TV with the explanation, "Those documents you signed and which you stated you understood were the instruments which moved almost all Jimmy Jack's assets, including all real property, into the Vengeance Trust." He then returned to Jimmy Jack's statement as Maureen began hyperventilating. "I have decided to be generous to my widow. What remains of the estate outside the trusts for my widow to inherit is the sum total of $20,000. $1,000 for each year of marriage. I believe that considering current revelations, that is much more than our marriage was worth. $20,000. 20. Maureen panted, struggling for breath. "But we were worth millions, even without the Pruitt Trust. How am I going to survive on $20,000 a year?" "Well, Jimmy Jack was surprised you chose to move everything into the trust for your daughters. But you did." Prentice picked the remote back up. "Would you like to see the video again?" he asked, smiling. "And you misunderstand. Not $20,000 a year. $20,000 is your total inheritance." Maureen stood up, glaring daggers at the lawyer. "No. And if you think you're going to get away with this, then you've got another thing coming. Even if he's moved them into a trust, I'll just move them out." Prentice smiled. "You can't. You're not part of the trust, and your prenup forbids you from touching any of it." "No, that document only covers the Pruitt Trust." Maureen smirked. "Oh, no, Maury. Read the document. It never mentions the Pruitt Trust. It protects any of Jimmy Jack's assets covered by any trust. Any trust includes the Vengeance Trust." Prentice smirked back at her. "And you were part of setting up the new trust. I can show you the video again if you like." Well, she huffed. "We'll see what the courts have to say about all this." She gathered her purse and stormed out, yelling, "Come on, girls, let's go." The girls sat, looking at each other and the lawyer, not sure what to do. Prentice chuckled and said, "You can go with her if you like. The restrictions of the trust won't start until tomorrow. Your father only had one more paragraph in his document. Basically, it said that he loved you in spite of your betrayal and forgives his daughters. But he wanted Maureen to be impoverished and isolated, and unfortunately, he could only do that by using you girls. He loved you and raised you as his own and hopes you understand." Later, as he watched the ladies through the window, where they were gathered around their mother in the parking lot, shouting and arguing, he thought back to his last conversation with his friend. Jimmy Jack had shown an uncharacteristic viciousness when he had really chuckled. "I'm kind of sorry I can't stick around to see the fun. I'm willing to bet that within a year at least 2 of those girls will be disenfranchised, while one of their remaining siblings collects the reward. Will 2 different girls collect rewards, or will one manage to collect both?" Inquiring minds want to know. Jimmy Jack had had a coughing fit, laughing at it all. "Are you sure we can't find a way to get all 3 kicked out of the trust?" Well, he had told the dying man, "I cut out a clause which includes infidelity and marriage a disqualifying event. If they're anything like their mother, that should doom them all." With his best part imitation, Pruitt had said, "Make it so." And so it was. Jimmy Jack's last instruction to his friend was to make sure the PI firm and the tertiary beneficiaries, the charities, were all aware of the $250,000 reward in the disqualifying events. He was sure that they'd keep an eye on his girls. It was only 2 weeks after signing the modified trust that James Jonathan Pruitt passed away, with a smile on his face. I know the nitpickers will want to know what happened to the girls, all the details of the revenge. However, since Jimmy Jack will never get to find out, why should you? Dear listener, if you have reached this far, please click on the subscribe button. It will be a great help.